Over the last few decades, the formal evaluation of educational programs has swelled into a flood tide. Look at almost any university today, and you will find an ever-growing mountain of policy documents, self-studies, and assessment reports piling up on academic desks. The legislative catalyst for this specific bureaucratic surge dates back to 1965. Senator Robert Kennedy attached an evaluation rider to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This legislation injected billions of dollars into public schools, particularly for disadvantaged children. But it came with a strict condition. Those new funds were inextricably tied to mandatory formal assessment systems. Yet, as this apparatus expanded into higher education, a strange paradox emerged. Institutions now spend massive amounts of time and resources running evaluations that frequently result in zero budget cuts, zero faculty dismissals, and no direct administrative action whatsoever. The standard defense of all this paperwork is that evaluation enhances rational decision-making, specifically to reduce college budgets. But the historical record contradicts this. Universities successfully managed budgets and made highly rational decisions long before formal evaluation systems were codified. Budget cutbacks existed long before these specific assessments did. If these exhaustive reviews do not primarily serve to streamline finances or guide specific decisions, they must serve a different, quieter purpose. Ultimately, they are tools for public legitimation. In the context of higher education and public funding, legitimation does not mean offering excuses or fabricating evidence. It means placing an academic program within a larger, justifiable context to prove its right to exist. When a university executes an evaluation, the actual data gathered is often secondary. The critical fact is that the university has a plan, demonstrating to lawmakers and the public that it is going about its business in a deliberate, responsible manner. Consider a state board of higher education reviewing all classics programs within its jurisdiction. After a lengthy process, they declare the programs are fine just as they are. No direct action results, no decisions are taken. Even though nothing changed on campus, those classics programs are now politically legitimated. They have been formally evaluated and cleared, protecting them from immediate external scrutiny. To secure this protection, institutions are forced to adopt a specific evaluation methodology, and every available methodology carries deep inherent flaws. To survive this bureaucratic landscape, program directors and administrators must deconstruct the four dominant evaluation paradigms, recognize their blind spots, and master the unwritten rules of procedural fairness that govern them all. We plot evaluation approaches on a spectrum, scientific on the left, humanistic on the right. At the extreme left edge sits systems analysis. It treats the program as a black box, filtering complex inputs into a single quantitative outcome, like standardized test scores. The difficulty is that educational programs seldom lend themselves to simple quantitative outcomes. Complex, multiple, and even conflicting goals are the standard in education. In primary education, administrators want to maximize literacy. They also want to build character and foster a pleasure in learning. Maximizing one single metric often distorts the others. The quantitative techniques used here are highly reliable, meaning they produce the exact same results consistently. But reliability is not validity. A perfectly reliable measurement might be completely invalid as an indicator of actual program quality. Systems analysis suffers from extreme reductionism. Its primary strength is optical. People are impressed with numbers because they appear objective. The metrics carry the authority of science, even when those numbers fail to capture what the program actually does. Moving slightly to the right on the scientific side, we find the behavioral objectives approach. This functions as an engineering approach. It demands that all program objectives be explicitly framed in observable behaviors. Instead of a single black box output, it fractures a massive institutional goal into dozens of tiny, distinct blocks on an assembly line. Rationality is strictly defined as the measurable congruence between stated goals and final outcomes. You specify a target behavior and check if the student exhibits it. Scaling this method exposes its limits. One project attempting to define behavioral objectives exhausted itself after specifying 20,000 separate goals. Because it is impossible to exhaustively list every goal of a complex educational program, The few metrics ultimately chosen for a behavioral evaluation are arbitrary. If an objective cannot be easily measured, this paradigm simply ignores it. Crossing the center line into the humanistic side of the spectrum, we encounter the professional review approach. Instead of statistical design, this method is built entirely on accumulated professional experience. In higher education, this is most clearly exemplified by the site visits of external accreditation teams. Outside experts evaluate the program against written codes and experiential criteria. This generates intense friction. While acceptable to the faculty, because professionals judge professionals, it erects a wall of suspicion for the public, who view it as a closed-door operation. The public inherently suspects that professionals do not evaluate themselves rigorously, operating on the assumption that doctors will not testify against doctors. Professional review yields peer insights that are completely unavailable to a systems analyst, but its flaw is political. It struggles to legitimize a program to anyone outside that specific academic circle. Finally, at the extreme right edge of our spectrum, we find the case study, or the anthropological approach. This method discards standardized testing entirely. Instead, an evaluator constructs a narrative based directly on the daily experiences and verbatim quotes of the participants. Without ordained metrics, the process relies on direct contact to understand what the program means to its participants. This reliance on narrative creates a vulnerability, extreme subjectivity. The report becomes a web of qualitative quotes filtered through a single author. This forces the reader to ask, how much of the evaluation is an accurate reflection of the program, and how much is simply the evaluator's personal opinion? Where are the baseline standards derived from? The case study's greatest strength is its aspiration for authenticity, yet its legitimacy rests entirely on the unquantifiable writing skills, balance, and personal judgment of a single person. Regardless of which of these four paradigms an institution selects, theoretical methodology is secondary to practice. There is a bedrock constraint that overrides all gathered data. That foundation is procedural fairness. Without it, the entire architecture of institutional legitimacy collapses. We can see the real-world stakes of this in a historical incident at the University of Illinois involving their Council on Program Evaluation, or COPE. During a standard review cycle, COPE suddenly put forward a recommendation to completely abolish the College of Communications, a move that would disband its journalism, advertising, and radio-television departments. The shock value of this action was immense. Approximately 20 other departments had been evaluated previously. Several had been found wanting, but none had faced such severe, arbitrary penalization without any advance warning. The college reacted to this lack of warning as a moral outrage. They mounted a massive operational backlash, leveraging their graduates who staffed major radio, television, and newspaper posts to fight the evaluation publicly. After the college collected 10,000 student signatures in protest, the university chancellor retreated. He noted that regardless of the educational merits of the recommendation, the political costs were simply too high to implement it. The evaluation system failed spectacularly here. It collapsed not because its internal metrics were mathematically wrong, but because it violated tacit agreements of equal treatment. The college was pulled out of line and targeted without due process. The lesson from the COPE disaster is that legitimacy is, at its root, a political notion. For any evaluation to be accepted, the interests of the participants must be procedurally protected. To function as public legitimation, an evaluation must adhere to a fairness checklist. It requires explicited procedures that are publicly known and consistently applied. Further, there must be strict confidentiality, restrictions against informal data, and explicit avenues for recourse. This brings us back to the central dilemma of institutional assessment. Different audiences will always demand different kinds of evidence. State legislators will favor the hard numbers of systems analysis, while university faculty will favor the peer-driven professional review. Because they will never agree on the perfect methodology, the only way both parties will ever accept the final result is if they maintain absolute trust in the fairness of the process itself. Over the long run, an evaluation system may or may not perfectly optimize a budget, and it may or may not perfectly measure a student's character. But if it lacks procedural fairness, it cannot provide legitimation. And without that, the entire apparatus is simply